I traveled 8 hours for my sister's wedding. At the entrance, my dad blocked me. "You're not on the guest list." I said nothing and turned around. 2 days later, the venue called them. "There's an outstanding balance of $28,000. I just smiled and said, "My name is Celeste." 8 hours of driving, 1 garment bag, my nicest dress, and my own father standing at the entrance of my sister's wedding looking me dead in the eyes and saying, "You're not on the guest list." That actually happened to me. And what unfolded over the next 48 hours? I still can't quite believe it myself. But let me back up. I'm the oldest of 3. My sister Brianna is 5 years younger, and she has always been the golden child. My dad Gerald treated her differently from the time she could walk. My brother Marcus and I used to joke about it as kids. It was funny then. A lot less funny once we were adults and nothing had changed. My mom Sandra tried to keep things balanced. She's the kind of woman who keeps the peace and hopes nobody notices the cracks. You can only paper over so much though. So Brianna's getting married. Big wedding, beautiful venue, the whole production. And how did I find out about the date? Public Facebook post. Floral border, little envelope emoji. Not a call, not a text. I told myself it was an oversight. I called to congratulate her. She said invitations were going out soon. Weeks passed. Nothing arrived. I texted asking if she needed my address. She said she'd check with Dad. That was the last she mentioned it. 3 weeks before the wedding, I called Gerald directly. He told me the venue had a strict guest limit, and they'd had to make some hard choices. Usual. Like he was explaining a delayed Amazon package. "So I'm not invited?" Yes. "It's not personal, Celeste." "Not personal. My own sister's wedding." I didn't yell. I said, "Okay, Dad," hung up, and sat in my kitchen thinking about every holiday I'd driven hours for, every effort I'd made for this family, wondering what any of it had ever been worth. The smart move was to stay home. Got in my car. 8 hours later, I pulled into the venue parking lot, smoothed out my dress, and walked toward the entrance. And there was Gerald, standing near the door like he'd been expecting me. He looked right at me. "Celeste, you're not on the guest list." Not a flicker of guilt. Nothing. I didn't say a word. I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove to the nearest motel. Sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall, and then I started making some calls. Because there was something my family had apparently forgotten about me. I was the one who booked that venue. Found it, reached out, handled the initial inquiry. And when Brianna was still sorting out the deposit, she'd asked me to put my credit card on file as the secondary contact. It was still on file. 2 days later, the venue called them. And I want to tell you exactly what happened. But first, honestly, if you were sitting in that motel room after being turned away from your own sister's wedding by your father, what would you have done? Would you have just driven home quietly? Because what I did next, I'm not entirely proud of. But I'm not entirely sorry either. And once you hear the rest, I think you'll understand why. So there I was. Motel room, bad lighting, the faint smell of carpet cleaner, and my phone in my hand. I want to be clear about something. I didn't go in with some big dramatic plan. I wasn't sitting there twirling my hair like a villain. I was just a woman who had driven 8 hours, been turned away by her own father, and was now staring at an email confirmation that still had her name on it as secondary contact for a $28,000 venue booking. Called the venue. Spoke to a coordinator named Patricia. Very professional, very polite. I explained that I was the secondary contact on the account and that I wanted to remove my card from file. Patricia paused. Then she said, "Of course. Is there another card you'd like to replace it with?" I said, "No. There isn't." Another pause. "I do want to make sure the primary contact is aware, since there's an outstanding balance still attached to the account." I said I understood completely, thanked her, and hung up. Now, here's where I want to ask you something. Was that wrong? I didn't cancel anything. I didn't call the caterer, I didn't touch the florist, I didn't do a single dramatic thing. I simply removed my own credit card from a booking I never agreed to be financially responsible for in the first place. That's it. Do you think I crossed a line there? Because some people I've told this to are very divided. Anyway, the venue, as it turned out, had been holding the final balance, just over $28,000, pending card confirmation before the event. Standard policy. Patricia had mentioned it during the original booking process, which I had attended and Brianna had not, because she'd had a nail appointment. I'm not even being sarcastic. She had a nail appointment. So when my card came off the account with no replacement, The venue did what any professional business would do. They called the primary contact. That primary contact was Gerald. I was not in the room for that conversation, obviously. But I heard about it in vivid detail from my cousin Renee, who had been invited to the wedding. Yes, my cousin was invited, I was not, let that sink in, and who has always been quietly on my side. Renee texted me that evening with 3 words. Your dad called. Then. Celeste. What did you do? I sent back a single emoji. The one with the small smile. You know the one. From what Renee described, Gerald had apparently gone from the phone call with Patricia straight into a full meltdown. He called Sandra. He called Brianna. He called Derek, which honestly, that poor man did not deserve to be dragged into this on his wedding eve. Everyone was scrambling trying to figure out how a $28,000 balance had suddenly become their immediate problem 12 hours before the ceremony. And here's the part that got me, the part one did not expect at all. Brianna called me. Not my dad. Brianna herself. She was crying. Not the graceful kind of crying you see in movies. Real crying. Messy, frustrated, a little bit angry crying. She said, Celeste, how could you do this to me? This is my wedding. And I just let her finish. I let her get it all out. And then I said very calmly, Brianna, I drove 8 hours to be there for you. Dad turned me away at the door. I didn't cancel your venue, I didn't ruin your flowers. I removed my own credit card from an account I was never supposed to be financially responsible for. So I need you to think carefully about who actually did something to who here. Silence. Then very quietly she said, Dad said you wouldn't come. I felt that land in my chest like something heavy. He said you probably wouldn't show up anyway, she continued. So he took you off the list. There it was. My father had not just excluded me. He had told my sister I wouldn't bother coming. He had made the decision for both of us, planted the idea that I didn't care enough to show up, and then stood at that door anyway just in case I proved him wrong. Which I did. And he turned me away regardless. I told Brianna I loved her. I told her I genuinely hoped her wedding was everything she wanted. And then I told her that when the dust settled on all of this, we needed to have a real conversation. Not about the venue, not about the money, but about what this family had been doing to me for a very long time. She didn't respond right away. But she didn't hang up either. I'm going to tell you what happened the morning of the wedding, and trust me, that part took a turn I absolutely did not see coming. But right now I just want to sit with this for a second. My dad told my sister I wouldn't show up. And then he stood at the door to make sure of it. Does that make you as angry as it made me? 'Cause I want to know, because what I did next I definitely did not plan. And honestly, it started with a phone call from someone I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years. The morning of the wedding, my phone rang at 7:14 a.m. Still in the motel, half asleep, hair doing something I don't want to talk about. I looked at the screen and almost didn't answer. It was my Aunt Lorraine. Lorraine is my dad's older sister. And she is the kind of woman who does not call you at 7 a.m. unless something is either very wrong or she has decided to get involved. With Lorraine, those two things are usually the same. Picked up. She didn't even say good morning. Just, I heard what Gerald did. Where are you? I told her the motel name. Stay there. I'm 20 minutes away. She showed up in 18 minutes with 2 coffees and an expression on her face like a woman who has been holding something in for years and decided today was the day. We sat in the parking lot in her car while she told me that word about the venue situation had spread fast through the wedding party group chats, and that people had started asking questions. Why wasn't the oldest daughter at the rehearsal dinner? Why wasn't she in any photos? Why couldn't anyone give a straight answer? Gerald had told the guests I had personal issues and chose not to come. He turned me away at the door and then told everyone it was my choice. Lorraine had heard this from 3 different people by 9 the previous evening. She pulled Gerald aside. He got defensive immediately, and she left the venue right then. That man has been doing this to you since you were a teenager, she said, both hands around her coffee. I stayed out of it thinking it would get better. I was wrong and I'm sorry. When someone admits they should have stepped in sooner, part of you wants to say it's fine. Part of you knows it really wasn't. I just nodded. She asked what I wanted to do. I didn't have a clean answer. Then she looked at me and said very calmly, the reception is tonight. You were never told you couldn't come to that. Lorraine. There's no guest list at a reception entrance, she said. There's a seating chart. And your family. I was genuinely torn. I called my friend Dana back home, who knows me better than almost anyone. she said. Celeste, if you don't go to that reception, I will never let you live it down. I went. I borrowed an iron from the front desk, steamed out my dress the best I could, fixed my hair, and Lorraine drove us both there that evening. Walking in felt like slow motion. The room was stunning. Soft lighting, flowers everywhere, the kind of event that takes months to plan. People already seated, champagne going around. I found a quiet spot near the back. Lorraine sat beside me like a small, elegant bodyguard. For minutes. That's how long it took before Gerald spotted me. I watched his face move through about 6 emotions in 2 seconds. Confusion. Something that almost looked like guilt before it hardened right back into anger. He walked toward me and I just sat there, hands in my lap. Will. He leaned down and said quietly, "What are you doing here?" I looked up at him. "I'm at my sister's wedding reception, Dad. Is there a problem?" He opened his mouth, closed it, glanced at Lorraine, who looked back at him with full glacier energy. He walked away, and something shifted in me right then. Not dramatically, quietly. I had spent so long making myself smaller around this man, driving 8 hours hoping to be included, waiting on an invitation that was never coming. And sitting in that chair, I wasn't asking for anything. I was just there. About 20 minutes later, Brianna noticed me from across the room. She was mid-laugh at something Derek said, and then her eyes found mine and everything on her face changed. She excused herself and walked over. I stood up, honestly not knowing what was about to happen. She stopped in front of me. Dress, flowers in her hair, the whole picture, and for a moment neither of us said a word. Then she hugged me, hard. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. Something that had been tight in my chest for a long time loosened just a little. But the night wasn't over. Not even close. Because Gerald was still in that room, and he had apparently decided that losing gracefully was not something he was willing to do. What he did next, in front of everyone, made my cousin Renee grab my arm and whisper, "This is going to change everything." She was right. Gerald stood up. Not to give a toast. Not to welcome anyone. He tapped his glass, the room went quiet, and he started off fine. Brianna, Derek, how proud he was, how beautiful the evening was. People were smiling, happy tears here and there. And then he looked directly at me. "Some of you may have noticed we have an unexpected guest," he said, still smiling. "My oldest daughter." Despite not being invited, the room went quiet in a completely different way. Every head turned. Renee grabbed my arm under the table. Lorraine set her glass down slowly. And I just sat there, hands folded, face neutral. Because I knew Gerald. He wanted a reaction. He always wanted a reaction. It was how he controlled every room he walked into. He wasn't getting one from me. He kept going. Something about boundaries and family decisions. All of it wrapped in this pleasant, reasonable tone that made it somehow worse. He wasn't yelling. He was quietly humiliating me in front of everyone my sister loved, champagne glass in hand. Brianna had gone white. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into the tablecloth. And then Lorraine stood up. No tapping of glass. No raised voice. She just stood, and the room paid attention immediately. "Gerald," she said. "Sit down." He blinked. "Lorraine, I'm in the middle of." "I know exactly what you're in the middle of. Sit down." He sat down. Lorraine looked around the room and said, "Celeste drove 8 hours to be at her sister's wedding." She was turned away at the door. "She's here because she loves her sister. That's the whole story. Congratulations to Brianna and Derek." She picked up her glass, took a sip, and sat back down like she hadn't just changed the entire atmosphere of the room. Then Derek started clapping. Slowly, then a few others joined. Not a Hollywood moment, just enough to make it clear where the room stood. Gerald didn't look at me for the rest of the night. An hour later, Brianna pulled me into a hallway as the reception was winding down. Eyes red, not from happiness this time. "I didn't know he was going to do that," she said. "And I should have called you myself. I should have made sure you had an invitation." I asked her straight. "Did you actually want me there?" She started crying. "Of course I did. You're my sister." I believed her. It didn't fix everything. There were years of things underneath this one day that would need real-time and honest conversations. But it was a start. The $28,000 balance, by the way. Gerald had put his own card on file the morning of the wedding. No choice. Renee told me it caused a serious argument between him and Sandra, because Sandra hadn't known that balance was ever sitting on my card. She'd assumed Gerald had handled it. He'd assumed I'd absorb it quietly, the way I'd apparently been absorbing things for years. Sandra called me that night. She didn't say much. Just, "I'm sorry, Celeste. I should have paid closer attention." 2 apologies in one evening. That sounds like a small thing. It didn't feel small. Gerald walked past me twice that night and found something fascinating to look at on the other side of the room both times. Not a word. I drove home the next morning. 8 hours, same road. But lighter somehow, even with everything still unresolved. Even knowing the conversation with my father was still coming. What I didn't know was that Gerald would be the one to reach out first. And that it would happen in a way I never would have predicted. Do you believe people can actually change? Because I used to have a very firm answer to that. What happened next might just shift yours. Gerald called me on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the wedding. I almost didn't pick up. I stared at his name on the screen for so long the call nearly went to voicemail. Then something, curiosity maybe, or just the part of me that wasn't done yet, made me answer. He didn't open with an apology. That would have been too simple for Gerald. Instead he said, "I'd like to see you, if you're willing." I said I'd think about it. A week later I drove to my parents' house. Not 8 hours this time, they'd moved closer a few years back, so just under 2. Sandra met me at the door, hugged me longer than usual, and then quietly disappeared into the kitchen, which told me she and Gerald had talked and this was his moment to handle. He was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. No TV on, no phone in hand. Just sitting there, which was already unusual enough to put me slightly off balance. I sat across from him. For a moment neither of us said anything. Then Gerald looked at me, really looked at me the way he almost never did, and said, "I handled things badly. For a long time. Not just the wedding." Waited. "I told myself I was keeping the peace," he continued. "Keeping things simple. But I was just taking the path that was easiest for me. And it wasn't fair to you. Now look." Was this the dramatic, cinematic breakdown I maybe had imagined 100 times? Well, Gerald is not a man who cries or speeches his way through things. This was quiet and uncomfortable and a little clumsy. But it was real. I could tell the difference. I asked him why he'd told Brianna I wouldn't show up. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because I thought if she didn't expect you, it would be easier. For everyone." Easier for who, Dad? He didn't answer that. But the fact that he couldn't answer it was answer enough. I'm not going to pretend that conversation fixed 20 years of everything. Didn't. But something in him had shifted. Whether it was Lorraine sitting him down in front of 200 people, or Sandra finally telling him what she thought, or just the image of me standing in that parking lot having driven 8 hours to a door he was blocking. Something had landed. I told him that going forward I needed to be treated like his daughter. Not an afterthought. Not someone to be managed. His daughter. He nodded. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a nod. But from Gerald, a nod like that means something. Brianna and I have been talking more. Real conversations. Not the surface-level check-ins we'd defaulted to for years. She told me she'd had her own conversations with Gerald after the wedding, that she'd said things she probably should have said a long time ago. I don't know exactly what was said between them, and honestly it's not mine to know. What I do know is that she called me last month just to call. No occasion, no reason. Just to talk. That might sound ordinary to some people. For us it was everything. Sandra told me quietly the last time I visited, that she was glad I'd shown up to that reception. That she wished she'd been braver sooner. I told her there was still time, and I meant it. Lorraine, for her part, acted like none of it was a big deal. I called to thank her and she said, "Honey, I just said 2 words. You did the rest." I love that woman. And the $28,000. Gerald paid it. Every cent. And according to Renee, he never once complained about it. Which, if you know Gerald, might actually be the most remarkable part of this whole story. So where does that leave me? I'm not going to stand here and tell you everything is perfect. Families don't work that way. There are still awkward moments, still things that are being rebuilt slowly. But I'm no longer making myself small to fit into spaces that were never designed for me. I stopped doing that somewhere between that motel room and that reception hall, and I have no intention of going back. What I know is this: I drove 8 hours for my sister. I was turned away. I showed up anyway. And somehow, in the middle of all of it, my family started remembering that I existed. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, I'd really love to know. Drop it in the comments. Honestly, your responses mean more than you know. And if this resonated with you, a like goes a long way. If something didn't sit right with you, tell me that too. I'd rather hear it than not. Thank you for being here and for listening to the whole thing. Means a lot.